of that Atlanta businessman and FDR and the original kind of creators of that law. It is a difficult thing, though, to figure out how to make some of these transitions. You mentioned work requirements. And I want to zero in on that a bit more because I think that may be, I personally think that that is absolutely probably the starting point for a lot of very important reforms. Talk about the programs that could apply to. We've talked about TANF. How else could we apply it? What other programs?
The most obvious one would be food stamps and public housing. And so you would make it a condition of receipt and participation in those programs that you would be getting a job, looking for a job, or preparing for work. The reason that's important is not just for the people who are in the program already, but because these kinds of policies have a deterrent effect at the front end. Because lo and behold, when we had the TANF reform, one of the reasons the roles were reduced is that people were able to get jobs. And they said, you know, if I have to go check in every week at the welfare office, well, I might as well just get a job. And they did, and they found jobs. So it was not for lack, not in every case was it a lack of opportunity to work. It was needing the nudge to do that. If there's a path of least resistance, most of us are likely to take it, no matter what situation in life we're in. If we can get away with it, we probably will do that. And so reorienting that incentive structure of the welfare assistance to work has a deterrent effect right at the front end. So you never get people on that, which is good in so many ways, because the more time you have out of work on your resume, the harder it's going to be to get a job. So if you can avoid even ever popping into the welfare system, that's going to be much better for your future.
Quick anecdote on the nudge, and then I'll open it to questions for all of you. Back in the early 2000s, when Tommy Thompson was the head of HHS, Secretary of HHS for President Bush, he came to town to meet with state-level HHS leaders, basically, the heads of the 8 southeastern states of their Department of Health and Human Services, essentially. And it was a closed meeting, but Tommy Thompson and Wade Horn invited me to just sit in on it and to listen to the conversation. The purpose of the meeting was just to assess how has welfare reform worked. A lot of the people in the room admitted that they were among those who rang the danger bell. I mean, they were convinced that this was going to leave people impoverished and on the street. And one by one, they all said it hasn't had that effect, it's had a good effect. We're really pleased with the results. Some admitted it begrudgingly, but that was a conversation in the room. It had the right kind of effect. One of the things they continued to express concern over was the time limit, the amount of time that you were limited to actually be on welfare. But there was a mother there who had gone from dependency to self-sufficiency because of that limit, and they asked her what she thought about that limit. And her comment was, it's too long. And kind of startled everybody in the room, and they said, well, what do you mean it's too long? She said, because I didn't know what I was missing until I got the nudge, essentially. Till I was forced to get the job. If I had been pushed sooner, I would have discovered it sooner. And my life is better than it's ever been. That is what good, I think, anti-poverty policy should accomplish. It doesn't have to be tyrannical, it doesn't have to be coercive, but it needs to nudge, it needs to do the right thing. Do the right things, and it needs to have the right kind of incentives in place. So with that, let me open it up to questions for Jennifer or me.
Jennifer, I'm in the employee benefits business. We have a number of clients in the manufacturing facilities, and a limited number now. But one in particular, we are well aware that employees come to the so-called HR office and ask to have their hours reduced because if they earn so much money, they lose their food stamps, they lose their housing credits, they lose their Medicaid. And I'm sure that's exactly what you're talking about, earned income tax credits. Well, how does that formula work, and how can we go about making that not happen anymore?
Yeah, very interesting conundrum. I think this goes to why we need an iterative process between policymakers and the private sector as well, to recognize where the intersection is creating perverse incentives, and how do you how do you get the right balance to have a slope out of benefits so that the earnings increase can accommodate that slope, can compensate for that slope. So that I don't have a formula answer for you other than to say we need more information from the private sector in the policy making business so that we can identify challenges just like that.
Those are the kinds of changes we're looking for, Carrie, that we might be able to accomplish here.
I got a classic case study for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll talk about it.
We will. Those are things we're looking for. There are a lot of these problems that exist that nobody talks about, and just the slightest changes can make a big difference. Even our work on, we've done a lot of work in the past year and a half on prisoner reentry, separate issue. But you'd be amazed at the little tiny policy decisions, seemingly tiny policy decisions that have been made in the past that actually hindered somebody from re-entering society after paying their debt and entering the workforce. It's amazing, the little things people don't think about. And what you're talking about is one of them. Ann, you had a question.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions, but I'll just keep
Go with one.
First, just a comment. Some of the biggest poverty busters that we have, EITC, Earned Income Tax Credit, Child Tax Credit, never shows up in the poverty statistics because we don't show after-tax impacts of things. So we never even see in those numbers what the effect of that is.
Great point.
Now, to get to my questions, I do have so many. Have you looked at some of these slides and made some adjustments for when we as a nation went on this war on drugs and what that did to men and what, and in turn what that did to marriage? Because I think that it's not just one thing, but there's a bunch of things.
And that's a great question. We haven't adjusted the slides for that, but I will say that one of the major focal points of criminal justice reform over the past few years that Anita Dodd from the Georgia Public Policy Foundation can talk about, and Eric from our team, and Jamie can all, and Michael Schulte as well over by the camera can all talk about, is how much harm we did to non-violent, low-risk offenders by locking them up for extended periods of time with hardened criminals who then basically imparted their habits and their way of living to them. So people still need to pay their debt to society, right? We need to do things, but criminal justice reform is, I think, will address a lot of what you're talking about. There have been so many hindrances to men in particular, but women as well, from re-entering the workforce and from reconnecting with their families in a healthy way. So hopefully some of that will be changed through criminal justice reforms that have already occurred, but also those that are still coming.
And your point on the poverty rate not measuring for transfers of wealth, that all these programs, all the benefits are not calculated when we see the poverty rate. And so when the conversation about inequality in America, which we hear quite a bit of, is not informed by the calculation of taxes and transfers either. And the picture looks much different when you factor in welfare benefits received and taxes paid. So my colleague Robert Rector has done quite a bit of calculating dependence at a household level. So benefits received versus taxes paid gives you a much different picture than the conversation about inequality generally with yield.
Tom.
This chart is very compelling relative to the issue of poverty, but you could also have a lot of other graphs which show the impact of the decline of marriage against other issues. For example, 85% of women who have abortions are unwed, and the number one reason they give for having an abortion is they don't want to be a single mom. So at the core of the abortion issue is a marriage issue. If it's at the core of that issue, the core of the poverty issue, and you probably have 40 other graphs with
Sure.
the core of, you would think marriage and the restoration of marriage would be the number one issue in Washington, and yet I don't hear that. Do you?
No, I don't hear it either, unless it's a different marriage issue. But I think this goes to something that we've got to keep in mind in policymaking and in leadership generally. We are all frail human beings, and we have all made mistakes. So what I'm getting at is, I think a lot of people don't like to talk about marriage because we've all missed the ideal in one way or another. There isn't a perfect marriage out there. There's some that look perfect, but but there's a lot of divorce. There's a lot of separation. There's a lot of unmarried people who would like to be married, and because of those blemishes in our record, if you will, we feel like we do not have the capacity or the moral authority to talk about the ideal anymore. And that is a terrible shame. We need to talk about this, even talk about the ideal, even if we have fallen short of the ideal. And we need to talk about it with the humility that is requisite for that condition. We can't stop talking about the ideal, and to do so would be selfish.
Very good. And by the way, Tom, our organization has been focused on marriage from the beginning. One of the things we recognized was this success sequence as well. One of the things that became obvious was that while it is important, and Jennifer has made this point, Robert Rector on her team at Heritage has made this point, we need to tell more people that marriage matters. We've also got to recognize, though, that there are certain capacities someone needs to develop to be in a position to marry and marry well. That's why the research is so clear. The child born in an intact family is more likely to get an education. The child who is more likely to get an education is more likely to get a job. And the child who is more likely to get a job is then more likely to form and sustain a healthy marriage and family life. All those things are interrelated. We have to talk about all of them at once. But where people are most hesitant, getting to Jennifer's point, is to just talk about the value of marriage. Again, what you see, and Eric referred to this, we've got this caste system that people like Charles Murray and Kay Himowitz and others have talked about, where the wealthy are well educated, they get married before they have kids, and they generally stay married. The divorce rate is holding pretty steady. But in that lower caste, those things aren't all there. We have to be ready to talk about all of them and how they work together. Education, employment, family structure. Hessel, you have a question?
Yeah, one of the things you said is that the poverty rate has been fairly static. And so one question I had is, are there programs that are working well for those who are married, because if the marriage rate is going way down, then it would seem that something must be working really well for them? Or how do you explain the fact that it's not gone way up if the marriage rate is so closely correlated?
So a couple things to unpack. That's a really good question. The poverty rate among married families is very low. The likelihood of poverty for married families is very low. For unmarried, it's very high. For single moms, it's like 40% likely to be poor. So I would say that the issue, here's how the curve goes on the poverty rate. You have a pretty significant reduction in the poverty rate right before the war on poverty started, actually. And then the war on poverty reduces a little bit more, but then it stays pretty flat, little bumps in the road. So the war on poverty has improved the material living conditions of the poor. You couldn't spend $22 trillion without doing that. But it has not repaired the social capital that would allow them to escape. So I would say the safety net has been successful in what the safety net can do. The safety net can only be effective, I would say by definition, it can only be effective in providing material assistance, and it really does that best on a temporary basis before the dependence factor starts having other challenges worked in. So I'll grant it that, it's been successful as far as material needs go, but it has not been successful in getting deeper into the causes of poverty that would help rise above to self-sufficiency.
Yeah, I guess the issue is, it's kind of a human flourishing issue. Are you flourishing simply because your base kind of material needs have been met, or is there more to life?
Yeah.
And most of us, I think, we just think about ourselves and we think about our kids and grandkids and what we want for them. We think of something other than how poor people often live in America, right? And that's what we should seek. I'm going to take one more question. We're going to take one more. Benita, go ahead.
It's a very brief comment, and I think going back to what President Bush used to call the soft bigotry of low expectations, so many of the people we're talking about in poverty have no mentors, have no role models, have no expectations, and have nobody telling them there is no excuse. So I want to pat us and you on the back for the school choice work that we do. So many parents can make that choice. So many parents aren't able to make those choices, and there are teachers in the background and principals in the background in those school choice opportunities who are saying, I don't care where you came from, you have no excuse, you will excel, you will do better than where you came from. And I think that is such an important part of our work.
Thanks, Benita. And by the way, Benita has an interesting history. You ought to talk to her. She grew up in apartheid South Africa as a woman of color and has great stories to tell about what that was like and about what freedom and opportunity mean to her. They mean something more to her in a lot of ways, given her background, than it may mean to us, simply because she experienced something very different than what most of us grew up with. So, fascinating person to talk with. So with that, I'm going to call it. Thank you all for coming. We're going to be here for a while, so feel free to just come up and talk to Jennifer or me or anybody else on our team. Thank you very much.